Hi folks, welcome to this 20-minute mentor, How Can I Ensure Academic Integrity in the Online Classroom? I'm Oliver Drown. I'm a professor of educational foundations at Millersville University in Pennsylvania. At Millersville, I'm the graduate coordinator for our master's program in online teaching, which prepares K-12 teachers to teach online. I'm also the former director for our Teaching and Learning Center. That's called the Center for Academic Excellence, and I served in that capacity from 2013 until 2020. So the challenge I want to present to you today is probably one that you've all, if you've taught online, you've probably faced, is how do I ensure that students aren't cheating in my online class? I teach a lot of face-to-face classes, but I also teach online and blended. And so one of the things that I'm constantly considering is whether the students, the work that the students are presenting are their own. And I'm not alone in this concern. In a study in March 2020, right at the start of the global pandemic in the United States, as we did this mad rush to move our content online, Wiley, one of the publishing companies, did a nationwide survey where they surveyed 789 different teachers, and they found that this was a concern across a lot of different instructors. They found that, they felt that students were more apt to cheat online than if they were teaching that class in person. And it sort of makes sense, right? Students are working on this from home. Usually they're in isolation. Maybe they're not being proctored and maybe being monitored. And so there might be more of a likelihood that the students may cheat in that environment. And when students are teaching, coming to school or coming to a face-to-face environment, there's less likelihood that that will happen because they're being proctored, and then we have a better control over the types of materials and things they bring. And so, this is a real concern. When we talk to students, we find very similar results. At least 1 in 10 have reported that they've cheated on an exam if it's been taught in an online format. And so that's 1 in 10. And so that means that if you're teaching a class, a larger class, like maybe 100 students, there's a really good chance that some students are cheating. And so the thing that we want to consider is how do we do this in a way that can ensure some academic integrity. And so I'm going to provide some opportunities today for you to consider. I sort of break these down into 2 different groups. One are these high-tech solutions. These are things that may require some administrative support, so you might need to talk to a provost or a dean. They may require some sort of specialized software or specialized technology, so you may need to talk to your IT department, and they also could be costly. So some of these things range, in hundreds and thousands of dollars. And so these high-tech solutions are ones that are usually used in maybe situations which require that there be some sort of accreditation, or something that requires that it requires that level of support. Right? And then there's low-tech solutions. And I think the low-tech solutions, if you're an instructor who just wants to try to do some things in your class to maybe reduce the cheating that you think might be happening, these are low-tech solutions that you can incorporate that don't require that level of support administratively and certainly aren't as expensive. And I'm going to walk through each one of these, and hopefully this will give you some ideas on some things to do in your online class and maybe an online program. So let's start with some high-tech solutions. I'm going to break down the high-tech solutions into 3 different groups. First off, there are proctoring services, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There's also plagiarism detection software, and lastly, some student monitoring. So each one of these kind of does something different. And so it's important that we talk about each one of them, and I'm going to talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of each one. And so each one of these high-tech solutions are going to provide different levels of support based on the types of things you're going to do. So if you're having students write papers, you may want to do one type of software, whereas if you're going to do something where students are taking sort of a high-stake exam or something, you might want to do something different. And so each one of these technologies really does something different, and you're going to have to consider based on your needs which is best for your environment. So let's start by talking about proctoring services. These are really popular. There's a whole different group of these. You can just go out there on Google and check these out. Some of the ones are like ProctorU and Examiny. There's a ton of different ones, and they offer different types of support. And the idea with this is that you're paying for someone to either via live solution, like a live person who's actually watching students, so that person's watching the computer and watching what students are doing, or there's a digital process, maybe some algorithm or something where students are, there's a camera and watching students' actions, and it's helping to identify things that students are doing that might be concerning. And so this type of proctoring, it gives you sort of like hey, this student might be a concern. And with that, this is something you may want to do in your class, depending, especially if you're going to be doing something where like it leads to some high stakes like licensure exam or something. Those types of things are ones that we should definitely proctor to make sure that the students are able to meet the objectives and do it in a way that is really a model of integrity. I have to say that these things are really expensive, and they're usually not something that you do institutionally. Maybe you're just doing case by case. I know at our institution we use these types of proctoring services only for those high stakes. Like in our nursing program, we have some proctoring services because we needed students to be able to pass licensure exams, and we want to make sure that they are able to meet those. Maybe in some other classes too. So this isn't something that we're using wholesale across all of our classes just because of the expense, because it's usually based on the number of students who are actually being proctored. And so that's something to really consider. Is that something that depending on the nature of the programs you have, depending on the nature of the classes and things, that whether the cost really affords or leads to its use. So proctoring services is one. Let's talk a little bit about plagiarism detection. And there's a lot of these different softwares as well. Usually what they're doing is they're looking, these are things like Turnitin and SafeAssign and so on. So there's a lot of different services for these, and you can check this out on Google as well. But what they do is they scan student papers for plagiarized content. So they're really, for like Turnitin, what they do is they have a bank of assignments that students have handed in, and they're comparing the text that students are submitting and comparing that to the bank and library of content that either exists in their library or exists online. And so they're pulling from a bunch of different papers and things and examining that content versus other content. This is something that we actually use for all of our courses on campus, so that since we have a lot more student writing that's happening on our campus, this is something that's built into our LMS so that anybody can use. It is expensive though, but I think that's one of the things that we find a lot of benefit for, because we have a lot of writing intensive classes. I will say that one of the things about this, even though it's expensive and it offers really good services, it still requires the instructor to take a look at the end results, because sometimes you get a plagiarism check that says that like maybe 70 or 80% of the paper, maybe not something that high, but maybe something like maybe 20 or 30% of the paper seems to be plagiarized, and it might be something where the students are just quoting another paper. So it doesn't necessarily take the instructor out of the process. It still requires that you interact with those reports in a way and try to figure out what the actual report is telling you about the student writing. And so it's a really useful tool, but I would say use the data and use the reports and use them cautiously and interact with it in a way. Now, sometimes it's clear, right? We have students who, have, the entire paper seems to be plagiarized from some other source. In those cases, it's pretty cut and dry. But in other cases, you want to look to see, is it really plagiarism, or are the students just quoting something from someplace else and they've done it and cited it in an appropriate way. The software won't actually detect whether it's cited correctly. It'll just show you, hey, this is a concern. So you want to make sure you interact with that as the instructor. Next up is student monitoring softwares. Now, I will say that I have some concerns about these because what they do is in a lot of ways, they take over students' computers, and I have some privacy concerns with that. I will say that there's lots of schools that are using these and using them in really thoughtful ways, but I would say be cautious with this. So they have lockdown browsers, where what it does is it locks down a browser for an internet browser, so that when a student's taking an online exam, say like in D2L or Canvas or something, that the students can't leave that browser. So if they have something else open, it closes that. So it locks down the browser so they're unable to go anyplace else besides staying in that exam. That creates some privacy concerns, because there was actually a big news article earlier in 2021 in which some of the lockdown browsers were creating false reports for students, and so that I think is concerning, because again, just like we talked about with the plagiarism reports, it requires some analysis on the part of the instructor and some analysis on part of the IT department. So use these things, but also consider the types of things that you're doing. And the types of reports that are generated with these. The Keystone verification software, these are things that are showing that the students are actually, typing the things in and not just copying and pasting the things from other places. Again, this is a piece of software that the students would have to download to their computer. It creates some privacy concerns, and it creates some sort of big brother watching over our students. And while those things can be valuable, we have to be really judicious in when we want to include those things into our classes. The last one, I think, is something that it is built into some learning management systems, but there's also some software that you can add on, which is location detection. And so this does this through a variety of ways. Maybe first off is IP addresses. So every computer has an IP address, which is a specialized, location where it says where the students are coming from. And so the IP address, if you're doing something on campus, you can say, okay, I'm just going to make sure that the students who are taking this are actually in this room. So if they're in the room, they're going to have this IP address. And so that, or maybe a lab or something. If they're doing that, then you have a better sense that somebody who isn't taking the exam from I don't know, someplace far off, if a student maybe has hired somebody to actually take the exam, which is not something that's completely crazy. Sometimes these things happen where they'll, a student will, a dishonorable student will hire a student to write a paper, or a dishonorable student may hire somebody to, take the test for them instead, or have their brother or their cousin take a test or something. So what this type of this, the location detection, what this does is it ensures that people who in certain locations are only able to take the test. So this can be done through IP addresses, or maybe apps, or maybe it is a concert of the two. So that's again something that you should use judiciously and really consider and figure out whether the needs afford that type of thing. So whether if it's something that you really want to do based on the types of needs you have for your classroom. So that's some of the high-tech things, some proctoring service, some plagiarism detection software, and some student monitoring software. Let's talk about more of the low-tech solutions. And these are the things that you can do as an individual instructor in your classroom to better ensure academic integrity. So first off is test construction and administration. We'll spend some time talking about how you can write better tests and how you can administrate in such a way that can maybe reduce student cheating. Next off is course and assignment design. There are things you can do on the course level and at the assignment level can also help to reduce student cheating in your class. And lastly, the role that you play as the instructor, I think, is the most critical thing. And how you design your class and the role you take in the class, I think, is one of the most important factors, one of the most critical factors that is going to influence whether students cheat in your class. And so let's unpack each one of these. So let's talk about test construction and administration. The first thing I would say is the low-hanging fruit of test construction for online tests is, just create large question pools. If you do this, if you say, okay, I'm going to create 10 different questions on this subject and 10 different questions on this subject, and maybe having them subtly different, having some of the answers be different, and maybe some of the actual questions being different, but they're still assessing the same sort of things. And then what you can do is sort of bank these by different subjects. And so students are going to get one of these 10, and some students are going to get one of these 10, and some students are going to get one of these 10. So what that does is it sort of creates, just by statistics, a whole bunch of different types of questions that the students are going to face. So if a student is sitting next to another student, they're looking at very different exams. You can also randomize the questions so that question 1 for one student is different than the question 1 for another. And also, A, B, C, D isn't the same for the different students. And these are just settings in learning management systems that are really easy to implement. So you can just go in and say randomize questions or randomize the answers. And so what this does is it creates different orders and different orders of exams and different orders of answers that can help to reduce cheating from student to student. Another thing I would suggest is reducing the administration window in which you allow students to take this. Opening an exam and have it open for 24 hours, maybe really, beneficial for students, but that creates 24 hours of times for students to share information with one another. And so I try to have, really tight windows for this, maybe an hour or two. And I'm still trying to be mindful of the fact that I know students are coming at this from a variety of places in their lives. Some students are working and so on. But I also want to make sure that it reduces the chance that students are sharing information. So maybe a student who takes the quiz early or the exam early isn't sharing with a student with the information with a student who's taken the test like 12, 13, 14 hours later. And so by tightening that administration window, it reduces the chance that students are sharing information with one another. One of the things I've tried is to proctor exams through Zoom. So when I have the students taking it, I have them all log in, and I'm just watching the students as they're doing this. And now this is sort of like a low-tech way of doing some of that proctoring services that might be a little bit more expensive. So you have all of the students log in, you have them all be on their cameras, and while they're taking it and going through your questions in your learning management system, that you're able to watch that. It's not ideal. It certainly puts a lot of time and effort from you to be able to do that, but it also gives some sort of degree of security, or it communicates to students that you're going to proctor their progress. And so I think that communication can be help to support student integrity. Let's talk a little bit about course and assignment design. I think that how we structure assessment is going to be important for communicating academic integrity in classes. What I try to do is I offer lots of opportunities for students to practice before they actually take an exam or take an assessment. And then I let them retake things. So almost everything in my class is something that they can retake for a better grade. What this does is it reduces the chance that students are going to cheat, because they know that they can retake it if they want. And now that's going to be based on the case-by-case basis. Might not be something you're able to do in your content or in your context, but it's something that's what it does is it focuses more on the learning rather than the outcome. So I want the students to be successful in my class, and what I'm going to do is give them multiple opportunities to take and retake exams. I also make sure that I'm using a variety of different assessments. So if I'm using an exam, that's one thing that I'm doing in the class, but I'm also going to maybe have students write papers, or I'm going to have them take quizzes, or I'm going to do other things that lead to the exam. So I don't just have one large assessment, I have multiple assessments. And what that does is if you have one high-stakes exam, it actually increases the chances that students are going to cheat on that exam, because so much of their grade is going to depend upon it. Whereas if it's like a 10% of their grade or 20% of their grade, it actually decreases the likelihood that students are going to cheat on that, because they go, okay, if I don't do as well, I have other grades to make it up. I have other assessment data to help build up my grade. And so reducing the impact of a single assessment by creating lots of variety of different things is beneficial for students, and it's going to actually lead to students not cheating as much. I will say that if you focus in your assessments more on higher order thinking skills rather than lower order thinking skills, I think that also leads to things where students would cheat less. If something's really easy to answer through Google, they're going to use Google. So if it's like some sort of like, I don't know, like a knowledge-based thing, like what year was this done, or who designed this, or who discovered this. Those are things that are really quick, to find in Google. But if you're asking something, for students to compare something or to analyze something, those are things that, aren't so easy to find online. And so it's going to require some thought. And so those are things that, because the answer isn't easily findable online, it's something that is almost, forces the students to actually do the thinking on their own. And so that's something to consider. The last thing to consider is contract grading. And what this does, and this is really novel, and this is something I got from James Lang's book on cheating, is that if you create an opportunity for students to say, these are the things I'm choosing to do in your syllabus. Like you give them a choice of a whole variety of different assessments and assignments. And the students choose based on their needs and their interests. So some students say, you know what, tests aren't the best thing for me. Maybe I'm going to do a paper instead. So they contract grade and say, these are the things that I want to be graded on. There are some instructors who, what they say is, okay, I'm going to give you, 10 different projects and you can pick 5, and these are the 5 I'll grade. That's an example of contract grading. Or you can say, I'm going to give a whole bunch of different types of assignments. You pick the ones that you want. And so that changing and creating that variety, really builds student motivation, builds student ownership, and also reduces the chances that students are cheating because they're buying into the process and they're picking the things that they choose. The last piece, I think, is the important part, and I think this is a really good closure to this whole mentor that we're talking about today, is first off is that you as the instructors, you play a large role in this. And I know that individual students, they have individual choice, but a lot of what they do is going to be based on how you communicate things. So first off, if you're present in the class, in an online class, if you're showing the students that you're, there, right, there's going to be less of a chance because they're getting to know you and they're not going to want to disappoint you. And I think that most students want to build relationships with their instructors. And if you're out there and if you have some sort of online relationship with them in terms of, a really positive teacher-student relationship, they're going to not want to cheat because they don't want to disappoint you. And so being present out there and really fostering some sort of community and collaboration, I think, is a really critical thing. And so that's the first step. I think the other thing is making it clear what your goals and objectives are. Like if you're giving an exam, if you're giving an assessment, or if you're giving, a paper, explain why you want the students to write this. Explain why you want the students to do this and why it's so critical to their development, not only in your class, but maybe even where it fits in the overall program that the students are in. This is really important because it helps the students to see not this individual class, but overall how it fits in. And so that individual assessment the students are doing, they're going to be able to better connect that assignment, that objective, to bigger things than I just need to get a good grade on this. It's like this learning is important because it's going to apply to these other things. And I think the last part is being really clear with students about academic integrity. I know in all of my online classes, I link to the student handbook, the student code of conduct on our campus. I link to that, and it's something that I explained early on. I also have it in my syllabus that this is something that I'm expecting the students work to be their own, and making sure that that level of expectation is clear to the students at the onset, and say that, I would rather have you, submit something late, or I'd rather have you retake an exam than to have a student be dishonest. And explaining some of those things, I think, can help students better understand your expectations. I know that students shouldn't cheat, right? And the students know they shouldn't cheat. But I think that explaining that stuff early in your class, I think, can help set the stage for student success. That's some of the low-tech solutions and some of the high-tech solutions for helping to ensure academic integrity in your online class. Thanks for listening. See ya. Be well.